You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast.
Are you the type of person who wonders what makes a Christian geek podcaster tick? Are you the type of person that enjoys just listening to some good old-fashioned down and dirty geek talk? Well, if you are, today is a special treat for you because this is systematic geekology, and that means I am one of the Priests of the Geeks and your host for today's festivities. And I have a couple of special guests here with me today. I found one of your devotionals, geek devotionals, and I knew from that point on I needed to have you guys on. So I want the Kingdom, the Priests of the Geeks community to welcome Dallas and Celeste. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
So,
glad to be here.
Like I mentioned, I came across, I can't remember which one it was. I want to say it was Pokemon, maybe like a Pokemon themed devotional that I came across the first time. And then that led me to finding one of your podcasts and things like that.
Oh,
and
cool.
I'm like, it's always a fun experience for me when I get a chance to have dialogue with other Christian geeks, because there's usually some preponderance of backstory there and unique perspective on how we digest geek culture as Christians and things like that. So why don't you guys go ahead and tell the community about yourselves?
Yeah.
Well,
Celeste? I was passing the ball to you.
Okay. I was just taking the ball and running. So we are primarily a YouTube show where we take geeky pop culture items to let people know that they are loved. And we also have varying offshoots of that where we have a couple of different podcasts. We have a website. We stream on Twitch. We do Bible studies. We do a lot of things, but it's all with the goal of making sure that people know that they're loved, because like we love them, but God loves them. And even if they don't want to accept God's love, we still love them.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's funny because it almost feels sometimes when you're doing these kinds of shows, right? We are a geek themed Christian podcast. And that's a weird in between to sit in, because for some people it's far too secular and for other people it's far too Christian.
Yeah.
And the way that you guys just unabashedly normalize the Christian part of it is really cool. Like the first time that I heard Loose Connections at the end of the bottom shelf. Oh, yeah. Dude, I lost it the first time, especially with the bumper that you guys use. I'm like, that is perfect.
I'm so glad you like that portion.
Yeah, it almost feels like subverting the meta a little bit, because like it is like, you know, it comes time to do the let's think deeper about this part of it and let's reference the Bible part of it and all of that kind of stuff. So rather than, you know, dancing around it, it just you know, we're gonna tie some loose connections to this, and that's fantastic.
As a whole, Celeste and I, we come from a background where you know, our conversation just should be naturally laced with Christ in some fashion. Doesn't mean we're like just Bible beating people, everything like that and whatnot. But it is like, if it's part of our life, it comes out. And so we just do, we talk about Jesus. We love him and we love our faith and we love sharing that faith. And we try not to be like the stereotypical, like cheesy Jesus juke type of thing, but we see connections to same things, and we say, hey, you know, how can we point people back to Jesus using it? You know, I look at Paul and he's looking at the Romans. He's like, hey, look at these statues of these unknown gods. Look at the games that are taking place in this arena down the street here. Let me point you to Jesus using this. And when we look at that model, it's like, why can't we do that?
Yep.
Just because we're talking about anime and Doctor Strange and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a perfect, when you have something like this, it's another tool to be used to be able to point people in that direction. And, being able to convey that in this kind of setting, I think is important for a lot of people to hear, because there is a whole group of people that have heard things like are one of the unwritten things for that we strive for with systematic ecology is trying to show people that you can be a Christian and not be a jerk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because a lot of people have heard things like put away childish things and those kinds of misquoting of scripture at people to try and justify why you can't be into this kind of stuff, why you can't be into games or cartoons or movies or whatever the case may be.
Well, and that even touches on our origin story, for superheroes or whatever, which we're not. We are not superheroes. I do not run. But Dallas and I, when we were engaged, we had our first Comic-Con here in town, and we went early to stand in line. We were there like 5 a.m. One girl had been there since 3 because we were determined to get in. So we're standing there. We'd been there for hours. We're talking to people. And a church whose heart was in the right place, even though their methods were not, started protesting protesting the con. And they're yelling at people coming in going, "You're going to hell." And the crowd's yelling back, "We know." And the people who were around us knew that we were Christians because we'd been talking about ourselves. Dallas and I are on staff at our church. I mean, it's not like we can necessarily hide that. And so they were like, "Well, are you going to yell at us?" And we go, "Will it help?" "Okay, we're just here to see the guy who played Chewbacca. Like,
right.
If it helps, we'll yell at you, but we don't think it's going to. So we're just going to be here and be chill." And that's kind of when we realized that this was an audience that needed to know that God loves them. Exactly. Because there are people out there telling them that this is not something that you can do.
Right.
And love
and nobody's
God.
willing to step across the line and just do life with them and talk and speak life into folks.
Yeah.
And, we're already in geek culture. We speak the language, if you will. Why aren't we in geek culture speaking it? Why aren't we speaking hope? Point people back to Jesus. When I was in Bible college, we talked about missionaries going out and learn to speak the language of the areas that they're going into. But it's not just learning to speak the language, it's learning to speak the culture. And there's this great story I heard about this missionary. It's part of an inner city program in an inner city area in California. And they were having problems with these kids. Explained to them how to define God as God the Father and help them understand that. Because for these kids, a father was the dude who went to go get milk and never came back. And or he was the guy that abused them. And they were like, so that's who I should think of as God. And so what they did is they dug deeper and they realized in culture, the person that fit the mold of a father was their parole officer. So all of a sudden, when they're talking about God the Father, they're teaching them about, God the parole officer. And like they use that vocabulary. They pointed like, look at your parole officer. Look how he examines this. Look at how he exudes this example. This is what God the Father is like. And it worked. It clicked. There was a shifting that took place. And it's a matter of understanding the culture you're going into and being willing to speak that. And if you don't understand the culture, you can't speak to them. Yeah. And in geek culture, there's definitely a language. There's definitely an understanding of what is and what is not. And there's so many people in the church who instantaneously just want to go, to 11 and just in good intentions and the desire to be holy and desire to be sanctified. They kind of go hyper one direction. And it becomes a bad thing because instead of us pointing people to Jesus, now we're just being as bad as the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so somebody has to do that. Somebody has to be able to go, hey, let me point you to Christ's love here for a moment because you've been shunned by the church for so long.
Right. And tied into all of that is this misconception that like, if you are a Christian, then all of the passions and activities that you have are just like reading your Bible and listening to gospel music. And that's it. Don't get me wrong. Every morning, like clockwork, my routine is the same. I get up, I make a pot of coffee, I listen to the Bible, and I work out. It's regimented for a reason.
Right.
And that's a good thing. But God gives us passions.
Right.
God gives us things that we enjoy, a personality for us to cultivate and things like that. And so being able to show people that not only is it okay to have passions, but it's okay to ask big questions. You know what I mean? A lot of these different narratives and things like that, these fandoms that we love so much, the storytelling is derivative.
Oh, yeah.
It goes back to the core fundamentals of literature and storytelling and things like that. Just, with superheroes and wizards and things like that wrapped around them, and if you're a human, those are bound to prompt questions. And as Christians, it sometimes requires effort to try and unpack and compare against and all of those kinds of things, and being able to go there and to hear that it's okay to go there.
Yeah.
I know for some of us that are a part of this, we needed to hear that. We needed to experience that. And so being able to foster that not only in not only in other people, but in each other, like not even just to the audience, but we were just an example. We were just cutting it up about The Last Ronin, and we got into this whole idea of the character being built through suffering and things like that, and that whole human experience of that. And one of our hosts, Pastor Will, is a Lutheran pastor out of North Carolina, and there was a bit of a discourse there, right? On the air and things like that, because those are the kinds of things that we try to exercise and counsel other people,
sure,
to be able to exercise in a healthy, appropriate way while still just enjoying the things that you enjoy unapologetically,
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Which, by the way, that was a great episode. I really enjoy listening to the Last Ronin episode. I legitimately am going, how much money is in my free play budget to go buy these books?
Yeah, man. So especially if you're a Turtles fan, you can tell that it was written by the hands of the creator at the time that it was like it fit. It was written 20-some years ago, and it debuted 32 years ago. So just a couple of years difference between when it was actually intended for.
Right.
And it shows. And it just begs for dissecting and asking questions and allowing for larger themes to kind of wash over you. Yeah. Through loving these comics and things like that,
Right. But see, that's the thing about like the going, like your passion for, like, if you guys go back and listen to that last episode, which, by the way, encourage all listeners to do that, you can tell the passion and the impact that Eastman and just the franchise has had on you and some of the other guys in the chat. And that's the thing, is we're passionate about things because they have spoken to us in a deep way. They have encouraged, they have challenged us in a way. And so when we do that, these things come out, especially if we are looking at these things through a biblical worldview. Then we examine these things like, okay, why is this speaking to me? Well, it speaks to me because of X, Y, Z thing. And then we can present hope with those type of things. Well, and that's one of the things I enjoyed about y'all's conversation, was that there was a level of hope coming out as you guys are just nerding out about the Turtles and the Last Ronin. And I really want to know who the Last Ronin is, but I have to go buy the book first.
So we've covered the kind of the genesis of how you guys started doing this and things like that. I will say, you guys may in fact be the only podcasters that I know that do more shows and do more stuff than I do. That's the running joke on here, that you can find me just about everywhere because I'm so active in live streaming and broadcasting and different things like that. And I started digging into all of the different projects that you all have.
Oh, there's a lot. There's so many. Well, and the joke for a while was that every time we announced a new podcast, we were like, hey, it's the 531th podcast.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I feel like how I've heard other people talk about tattoos is how I feel about shows, about adding shows onto the docket and things like that, because it always feels like there's more to say. You know what I mean? And especially for something like this, for me, the rest of the gigs that I do, like I was on a stream earlier today that was talking about the weightier matters of the events of the last couple of days and all of that, and unpacking all of that, and so much of it, it's good stuff that needs to be talked about. It's all stuff that is needed but heavy. This is just fun. This is just getting a chance to cut it up about the things that we love and how it impacts us and things like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So rattle off for the people, so that for those that are interested in hearing more for you guys, what are some of the shows that you guys have going on?
Okay.
Well, we have the primary show, Geek Devotions, which is on YouTube.
Yes.
And that's where we put out weekly devotionals based in geek culture. Yeah, those are the video stuffs that we do. So there's that. Celeste, you just started a new podcast. What was that one?
We read Allegedly, where me and two of our friends who are also bookworms make each other read books, and then we talk about it. So it's only a once a month podcast because it was the 551st podcast, and I can only record maybe once every few months. So we have to only do one. That, and we're not doing, like, some of these books are pretty big. I think one of them was like 550 pages, which, you know, if you're a fast reader like me, is like a weekend, but some of us are not. And then there's also, you know, life. You can't just stay hidden away and read a book.
Right.
As much as that would be nice.
So we have that one.
Yep.
We have Com Talk, which is our main podcast that we do, which is kind of it's broken up into a couple segments.
Yeah.
Com Talk started off where it was just Celeste and I wanted to be able to give voice to people, because we have people who wanted to be able to speak into our community, but they could not do video. You know, you put a video camera in front of people, and sometimes have you ever seen Muppets from Space? One of you guys talked about Muppets from Space in your podcast last week. I love, first off, best Muppet movie ever, hands down. I'll fight you for it. But the scene where Miss Piggy first gets her shot to be the news anchor, and they go 5, 4, 3, and they point at her, and she goes, oh, it just freezes. That happens to people a lot. And there's a couple people in the early genesis of Geek Devotions where we're like, we want to put you on camera, and they're like,
what?
Hello, thank you for letting me talk to you today. It was just bad. And so we started our podcast, Com Talk, to give voice, because they will talk, and they have so much value to give to our community. So we started that one. And then in that one, we have 2 segments. We have a segment called Bees, Views, and Reviews, where my friend Branson reviews family-friendly, typically, but tries to do family-friendly, faith-based comics, because he got tired of not being able to share his love for comics with his kids. He hated sitting there and looking at his comics, and then his son come up and go, oh, this is too mature for you. And he's trying to find stuff that it's not kiddie. It's not, you know, baby's first comic, but it's something that his son, if it came in his lap, it would be okay.
Yeah.
And he knows there's a lot of parents out there who ask the same questions. So he created the show within our feed about that. And then
he's also an artist, so he has an interesting perspective.
Yeah. And then we have another show that's about to sunset, actually. Unfortunately, we have the last episode airing next week, and that's within the same Com Talk feed, called Primitive Rhythm Machine, which was a music review podcast, which was really great. And some really cool interviews came out of that one, including our guy John. He interviewed the guy in charge of Rottweiler Records. I don't know if you're familiar with Rottweiler.
Yeah.
And so but just several things like that. And then we have the one you mentioned earlier, The Bottom Shelf, which is a podcast where me and three of my friends, we talk about terrible movies. We watch them so you don't have to. And we reviewed Plan 9 from Outer Space, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, Battlefield Earth. That was terrible. Huh?
The movie we don't talk about.
The movie we don't talk about. The Last Airbender.
The Plan 9 from Outer Space episode, I shared it with the two other guys that kind of lead the charge within SG, and the three of us. That's what their introduction was. That was the first one that I listened to, and I'm like, I have a soft spot in my heart for movies and content where you can like see the strings and stuff like that. Like it is fantastic. That's what got me into Godzilla. That was the first Godzilla stuff that I saw, was when you can see the literal strings and things like that. And then to hear you guys ribbing on this movie that is, you're right, it's categorically a terrible movie, but it's kind of like Mortal Kombat Annihilation in that way. You have to go into that's awesome. That's fantastic. That's probably my favorite bad movie of all time, because honestly, like Mortal Kombat 95 came out right at the right time for me. I was dead on for me and my love for Power Rangers and all things martial arts and all of those kinds of things. So for me, when Annihilation came out, it was another Mortal Kombat movie. And so like I didn't have my big brain on when I was watching it. It was basically the equivalency of me taking my action figures out of the toy box and just smashing them together for like 90 minutes. It's fantastic. But now you can look back, and if you freeze frame certain shots, you can literally see the editing collapsing on itself in some of the places. It's phenomenal. There's a scene where Raiden comes in, like the shot, you can see, you're looking at the shot, and then Raiden just appears in the like, it's just so terribly cut, and it's fantastic.
Doesn't make no sense.
Nope.
So what Dallas doesn't say is that he did this so he has a reason to watch some of these bad movies, because there's some I just refuse. I refused to watch Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. I was in the room. I was there. I was like,
I like terrible movies though. Like that's the thing, is that's where I was like, I've been looking at doing this this particular show in some form since the inception of Geek Devotions 6 years ago.
He tried to talk me into it, and I said, we were going to create a rating system where we were going to try to discover the worst geeky movie of all time, and there was going to be a point sheet to give points to. Just never materialized, and then last year, John Haryu, who is he's the DM for the podcast that Celeste is on, called Playing Games with Strangers, which is an actual play D&D game. Yeah, not connected to Geek Devotions, other than me being in it.
But John came to me, he's like, "Hey, I want to do a podcast for Geek Devotions where we watch terrible movies, and I want to invite your friend Kevin, the Dapper Man, who does movie reviews on YouTube, called the Dapper Man Reviews, to be to help host it." I was like, "Let's do it."
That's awesome.
That's how it happened.
Yep.
Oh, that's fantastic. So
John's the reason we start a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, so legit, this has become my reason for getting a chance to go and see some of these movies and do some of these things and all of that kind of stuff. I'm doing it for the podcast. I promise.
Yeah.
It's just for the podcast. You know what I mean? So gotta ask, what are some of your favorite fandoms?
I can't pick between my children.
I said some, babe.
Yeah, multiples.
I am a big sci-fi nut. Like, I like all science fiction, and I like science fantasy, and I can go into the explanation of the difference of that, but it's easier to just be like, hey, go to the podcast where we talked about it, because it is very different. Yeah. Like, I just spent 20 hours over the last several weeks listening to the audiobook of Dune, which was fantastic. I personally, I like anime. I don't know, like Pokemon. I like all the things. So, like, I have been a geek. I've been a bookworm since I knew what a book was. And I have been a geek since I was about 16 when my dad married my mom and went, "Oh, you like to read? Let me pass you stuff." And he started passing me more like fantasy, and really enjoy fantasy too. So basically all his stuff that he was into, I was like, "That's cool. What's this?" And then I just got into everything else as well.
That's awesome. So you'll be very happy to know that this is for SG. This is the year of Lewis. We're going through C.S. Lewis's stuff. The main anchor for it is the Narniad, and then we're doing some of his more theological works, and then we're talking about Screw Tape and a bunch of his stuff throughout the main feed and the Patreon feed.
Nice.
And are you doing the space trilogy?
Yes, that's part of it.
Nice.
It's later on this year. We're going to be doing an episode between another one of our co-hosts, Josh, who's the editor. That he is a very big fan of the space trilogy. I am a very big fan of the Narniad, and we're going to be doing a geek debate about which one's better.
I'm going to tell you right now, book
different.
3 of the space trilogy, it crashes pretty quickly.
Yeah, the third book's rough.
Book 1 and 2 were great. Book 3,
yeah, yeah. I've gotten through book 1. I haven't started book 2 yet, and it's really good. It's just different than Narniad. I'll give that.
Oh yeah,
but like. It's funny because I low key it didn't start off intentionally this way, but I am there's been other co-hosts on throughout the year so far with the different Narnia episodes, but I've been the constant voice because right after I got saved in 19, I got injured. And so I was laid up for a while, and that's when I found Narnia. And I powered through all 7 of them, and I fell in love like that.
Yeah.
To
Nice.
me, I am the type of person that says my usual hot take is that Lord of the Rings is an inferior work to Narnia.
Celeste's about to throw hands.
No, I'm not. I'm reminding myself that this podcast is not about debating.
So, but yeah, one of the things that we've been doing is comparing the books to the movies and all of that. And the movies, they hold a special place in my heart. They are what they are. I think they're beautiful. I wish they would have just Harry Pottered that situation and just powered through and got those same people through and did the through line through the entire thing. Because I think they got some really powerful acting out of that trilogy that they made. But infinitely so, the books are better. Like Lewis just captured something that is just so magical in those books. And yeah, you can say, and that's the big thing that we keep coming back to and in the episodes is it's reflecting truth. It's reflecting a greater story. Word. You know what I mean? And that's ultimately, we're seeing glimmers of that wonderful truth that we all hold so dear that really gives it that magical quality. But his style of storytelling allows for you to live in this world. And for me, I'm a sucker for that. And I wish I could read a little bit faster because books have a tendency to be a lot better at providing a lived in world experience, whereas not a lot of movies or TV shows are able to capture that same sort of atmosphere. By the way, there's a contingent of our audience who's thrilled to hear you use the term bookworm, because that's the one fandom we have not been able to capture a full-time host to be able to talk about. So the fact that you're even shining some light and giving some love to the bookworms, when Dallas told me that was what one of your fandoms was, I was like, oh, part of our audience is going to love you.
Well, and I always tell people, like I said, I was actually talking about this with my mom recently because I read a book for our book podcast called The Enchanted Hour, and it's talking about it's a nonfiction book. It's talking about the benefits of audiobooks,
Right.
especially in children, but in general with everybody. And so I was talking to my mom about it, and I was like, well, how old was I when I started asking you to read? Because I had this story that she and my grandmother had always told about I would grab a book and I would, if they didn't pay attention to me and read to me as soon as I wanted them to, I would hit them with the book. Apparently, I did that before I walked.
Nice.
I would crawl to a book and grab it and hit it. So I have always been a lover of stories. And once I learned to read, there was no stopping me. I went from, like, I vividly remember this because I was older when I learned to read. And I have dyslexia and a couple of the learning disabilities that make reading a interesting thing for me. But I remember something clicked with the words, and all of a sudden I went from reading like See Spot Run to I'm reading Little Women and going, where's the rest?
Huh.
So something in my head just clicked. So I think I have I'm down to 4 right now books going at one time, not counting the manga I'm about to start.
That's
which
funny.
is nice because I am dyslexic, so I like reading manga because it makes more sense to me.
Huh. Yeah,
It's
I can
backwards.
see that. That's
it goes
funny.
right to left instead of left to right, and so my brain goes, "Oh, something makes sense! Yay!"
Finally, all right.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
That's
cool.
cool. So, but yeah, I'm really into sci-fi as a whole. Less fantasy, more sci-fi. We're actually talking about that. Like, I just can't get into things like Lord of the Rings and like Wheel of Time and stuff like that because half the time I'm looking at it and I'm going, when do they bathe in this?
Right?
How nasty is their face right now? Like my brain just goes there and it's not my thing. I'm more into science fiction, space age stuff. I love post-apocalyptic movies and shows and games. I love anime, and that's a big part of my life is anime and comics. I'm not a big bookworm, but I'm a really really slow reader, and so it's hard for me to maintain a book because I have to read lines several times to really be able to get it and understand. Which it's great for when I'm reading something I have to study, but for just pleasure, it's hard for me. But like comics and anime or manga rather, they just kind of jump off the page for me because of the visual cues with everything else, especially when you have a really great artist who's working through the manga like Kira Toriyama and those guys did fantastic jobs with their mangas. Tezuka was phenomenal at drawing you from panel to panel as you read through. He did a series called Phoenix, which was an amazing series that I want to collect. I have one of his series called Buddha, which actually walks through the story of Buddha. But he has this one called Phoenix, where the first book takes place at the beginning of time, and the second book takes place at the end of time. The third book takes place right after the first book ends, and then the fourth book takes place before the second book starts. And it goes back and forth. And the plan was for it to end up in modern day, which he passed away sadly before he was able to finish the series. But the art in it, like you follow the flow so much that it just draws you in. You feel like you're watching an anime as you're reading this beautifully crafted story. And so for me, I'm really big about art. I'm really big about the way that cinematography and the way things look and the way that the imagery emotes for an individual. I'm the guy who will sit there. I'm like, okay, how are they doing this shot? How are they making this thing happen here? How bad is the green screen here? What are the practical effects here? That's what I do when I watch a film and when I watch television. And I'm also I'm not as huge as some people are, but I've gotten the name of it being the guy who's really into Godzilla. There are people who are far more into Godzilla than I am, but I do enjoy Godzilla.
We did a month devoted to Godzilla where everything, the podcast, the devotions, at that point we were doing extra Tuesdays, which have dropped off because time. And we did an entire month devoted to Godzilla. There are people that was their first introduction to us. And so they think that we like love Godzilla. And I'm like, yay, dinosaurs. But we have friends who are like really into it. And we're like, we're not.
Yeah. Shout out to our friends at Monster Island Film Vault, because my dude Nathan knows his stuff.
He knows his stuff. That's actually how we met Nathan, was that month.
Yes.
That's awesome. I used to be in the restaurant business, and I would cater when I lived out in Ohio. I catered for a schlocky B movie, like a B horror movie convention.
That's
and
awesome.
One of the things that they did was they would show old Godzilla films, and they put like on giant projectors and the whole 9 yards, and like so you could see very evidently the ridiculous nature of old Godzilla and things like that. But that spawned this love that like I kind of fell backwards into appreciating kaiju and, you know, these different Japanese properties and tokusatsu and all of those kinds of things, primarily because I'm literally the running joke on the show is I'm the living embodiment of the 90s. I'm the quintessential 90s kid out of the group. So for me, tokusatsu is such an art form, you know what I mean, in all of its ridiculousness. And it does come down sometimes to guys in flamboyantly colored spandex fighting with explosions behind them and things like that. 100%. It is a silly Sentai fight.
Are you talking about JoJo's Bizarre Adventures?
Oh, that's a wonderful one too. Hey, you should check out a podcast called Henshinmen.
Yes.
Which Henshin, it's kind of the proper term for when you have guys who transform like that. They're talking about, they're actually going through the Kamen Rider series right now, but they go into detail with some of the background of what's happening in the historical context and everything also. You might enjoy that.
That's cool.
I'm just going to recommend all the things that aren't us.
We joke. We spend probably 80% of our time telling you to watch somebody else than us.
Yeah. Well, we tend to start episodes with what you're geeking out on right now, and then geeky recommendations at the end. And you know, all of that. And so, but it's that idea that, you know, I think one of the things that kind of gets lost sometimes in certain fandoms, this has translation points for multiple different fandoms. So no, I'm not just talking about Star Wars. It's one of them, but I'm not just talking about Star Wars. We gotta be okay with new fans and new material for new fans.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Like not everything is made for everybody.
Right.
And so being able to recommend these different things that you're enjoying and geeking out on and different things like that creates more geeks to continue these things on. The reason why somebody like me gets to talk to one of their creative heroes is because in the 90s and 2000s, some people made some versions of the Turtles that hit for other people that weren't me. You know what I mean? Like that is some of those 2000s Turtles are just so kiddie. Like they're so made for kids. But whatever, like the one that I fell in love with, when they weren't killing off the Turtles or doing Darkest Timeline stuff, it was pretty kid-like, just being honest. And so that's one of the things that confounds me. And I'm a comic. My big fandom is comics, and there's so much gatekeeping in comics, especially with the MCU and stuff like that. And like, what makes you a real fan and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, if you want stories for the next however many years that these characters have been around, then you got to be okay with them writing things that are for other people, not just for you. You know?
Sure, totally. That, you know, gatekeeping is one of the biggest problems we've seen in geek culture across the board. We have a con locally called Geek Con, and you go there and it's such a great con because it spans everything. I mean, everything. We have anime stuff, we have comic stuff, we have sci-fi stuff going on, even stuff for the wrestler fans. And But even like there, you walk through and you hear people kind of like do a little bit of gatekeeping, and then there's always people like, hey, like why be that way?
Right.
Like that's one of the downsides to stuff. And we've talked about it on and off on our show several over the years of, as a Christian, how do we handle gatekeeping? There's a thing that we're passionate about, and some of it is we're passionate about it and we hate to see it quote unquote ruined, but we need to stop thinking of things being ruined as possibly it's more of an opportunity for it to grow and become something new. Now, there are certain things that you're like, okay, that's probably not a good idea. Like, not really sure why all of a sudden we have a murder mystery movie about Winnie the Pooh, because that was just announced today, called Blood and Honey. This is a real thing.
I'm so
Winnie the Pooh.
Oh yeah, I'll send the link into the.
It's a real
so
thing.
Angry about.
It's like, why are we doing this? Like,
yeah,
why?
And I'm like, because it's probably somebody that grew up in the 90s. That's why. Just being real, because we would do that.
Yeah.
But you may remember a couple years ago, there was a guy on YouTube who put together a really, really fantastic looking, fascinating look at the dark side of what Power Rangers could be.
Yep.
And it was kind of a mini film. And people were kind of angry about it because it was super R-rated. And Jason David Frank came out and he was like, look, I get why you did it. And I'm paraphrasing heavily. He goes, but you have to understand that when you have something like that, there's a property that's connected to people in a real way, and you have to be honoring of that. And I think that gatekeepers have taken the love for something too far.
Yeah,
because I have a desire to protect something that means something to them. At the same time, some people do take things too far and forget to honor the spirit of what's being created. And so there's this balance that goes back and forth between what we're creating nowadays and honoring the spirit, but also allowing it to grow and become something new.
Yeah.
You said it so eloquently. It's a fine line, right? Have you guys seen, are you guys horror fans?
Celeste isn't. I've watched several. I enjoy it every so often. I'm not I've watched probably more brain damage productions than I should have when I worked at Hollywood Video.
I have a pretty fine line of horror, and it pretty much ends with vampires.
There you go.
We do like vamps.
We do like vamps.
But yeah, so not as much though. I did watch Ankle Biters though. Have you heard of Ankle Biters?
I have.
Midget vampires, baby.
Yeah.
I had to rent it.
No, you didn't.
So Scream, the last Scream movie that just came out, the big thing was that it was kind of a wink and a nod against toxic fandom and all of that. And it satirized toxic fandom and stuff like that. But it did so in a way that was really clever, but offensive to some people, because it straight out says, how can fandom be toxic? It's the things that we love. And there are some people who think that way. But the reality is that if you have somebody who's creative and they create a thing and everybody loves it, that's wonderful. Now we need to be okay with somebody else creative coming along and doing something different with that same thing. You know what I mean? For me, I loved the dark. Would I want an entire series and cinematic experience and the whole 9 yards? No, I thought it was a really cool indie project done by somebody very, very well, just shot really well. I thought the atmosphere was really cool. And it was just a really cool what if story for characters that had already been established. You already have all of this time spent with these characters and things like that. And I think there's beauty in something being generational enough to speak to different people in different ways, to do different things with it. That, and some of the same people that were crying foul of that were some of the same people that along the way said, I want an adult Power Rangers. I want a Power Rangers with stakes. Well, that is what a Power Rangers with stakes looks like. You know what I mean? I will say they really turned the dial up. I'll give them that. You know what I mean? They do not pull punches. but it's a Power Rangers universe with stakes. It's part of why I love I've recommended a couple times on the show, the Power Rangers, the audio drama that's put out by a group called Scyther Inc. that does different audio dramas for different fandoms and different things like that. They've got an X-Men one, and they've done a couple of other different things. And it's like, spoilers, Chicago gets totally obliterated by Lord Zed, and like millions of people die in it, and it stakes, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's not for everybody, but it's something that creates new fans and reaches different people, and it's for somebody. It just doesn't have to be for us, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people who really get angry about it are probably coming from the point of view like, well, but this is for kids. Well, I mean, you're a parent, so don't let your kid watch it. Yeah. Plain and simple. Don't just, and that's the problem is I think a lot of people they want to go blindly into things. You have to go, okay, well, what is it? You know, that one of the complaints that people had about Doctor Strange was that it was so dark and so much. I mean, it was basically Evil Dead Part 4, and in a lot of ways, and
that's why I loved it.
Yeah, exactly. But people didn't know that. They're going, "Oh, Marvel, I can take my 5-year-old." No, pump the brakes.
Right.
Mom, Dad, read why it's PG-13 for a second.
Please pick up a Doctor Strange comic book.
Well, I think it was you that I saw on the socials make a post about that after after Multiverse of Madness came out. Like, you need to understand that Doctor Strange is a horror book. Like that's usually where you have the crossover with the Cthulhu verse and all of those kinds of things. And you have a lot of kaiju stuff, and you have a lot of dark magic stuff, and all of those kinds of things. So, the obvious argument is, your average run-of-the-mill parent of the average run-of-the-mill 5-year-old isn't going to pick up a comic and isn't going to know one superhero from another. But Google's a powerful thing. You know what I mean? That Google machine that we all have in our pocket.
20 seconds, and you have all. Heck, IMDb. I mean, it has a whole parent guide, which, to be honest, I trust more than some other parent guides that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are you guys geeking out on right now?
I'm watching Bleach right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Bleach. It was from the early 2000s, the anime series that lasted forever, and it's coming back. And so I'm like,
coming back.
Yeah.
Hunter x Hunter is coming back.
I'm still confused by that.
But Hunter x Hunter is coming back?
Hunter x Hunter is coming back. The creator announced it like this week.
Yeah. He created a Twitter account just to announce he's doing new chapters of Hunter x Hunter. But
anyway,
we're watching Bleach right now. We're on episode, I think, 120 right now.
121?
Something like that. We watched several today. So we're geeking out about that, watching that all the way through.
I've been watching How to Keep a Mummy.
Yeah.
Because it's adorable. It's an anime.
I'm not sure I've ever heard of it.
You got to explain the one, babe.
So I have a thing where I just like everything adorable. It doesn't matter if it's meant for me or not. If it's cute, I think I love it.
I just want you to know my wife is vibing real hard with what you just said.
So, but it's a anime about a kid whose dad is a archaeologist, sends him all these weird things, and he gets this coffin that looks like it should hold a vampire, and it's a mummy, and the mummy is like maybe 6 inches tall, and he's like, what am I gonna do with this mummy? And the mummy's like, don't send me back. But it doesn't talk, so it's all like in this little squeaky voices, and it's adorable. So that's what I've been doing since I finished Rating of Kings.
What did you say? Since you finished what?
Ranking of Kings. So for my birthday this year, I got Crunchyroll. So I've been watching all the animes. But it's a fantasy-based anime where this young boy is deaf, and his dad dies, and then the advisors determined that because he's deaf, he can't be king. So they give it to his brother, but then there's a mirror that's like controlling things. And it gets really intense and really in depth, but it's also strangely one of the most wholesome animes I've seen in forever.
It's weirdly like wholesome yet bloody.
Yeah, it's like
wholesome yet bloody. There we go.
You just have to watch it.
It is the equivalent of slimy yet satisfying.
Yes. Yes.
Nice. Well done. Yeah, I started diving into some of Crunchyroll just to see what's out there because so to give you an idea, the extent of my anime knowledge is like the ones that you would expect to hear out of somebody like me. Dragon Ball, so hot take, Dragon Ball better than the rest of them. I mean, Z is cool. Z is what it is. GT, I'm a GT apologist. I really do enjoy GT a lot. I think it's better than Super.
You are in the minority, sir, by saying so well about GT.
Yeah. Oh, I know. The thing that I always tell people is you have to go back and experience the Japanese version. And I know that sounds like such a tweeby anime lover's response. You just need to watch the Japanese version, but the music, the atmosphere, the butcher job that the dub does with GT is just so horrendous that no wonder why people don't like it. Half of it doesn't make any sense.
To be fair, there's a lot of anime out there that's come stateside and they dubbed over quickly and they Americanized it because kids can't know what a rice ball is. No. And they butcher the stories and they're completely different. We watched several years ago, I introduced Celeste. Celeste, I watched Voltron for some reason. And I was like, hey.
Because Voltron is amazing. That's why.
We didn't have internet yet. So we were watching what we had in the house.
That's what it was.
Right after we got married.
We had internet and I was like, hey, let me show you Go Lion, which is what they butchered for Voltron.
Right.
So much more intense. So much more interesting.
Yeah.
Even Power Rangers. I'm with you, man. I love me some Power Rangers. The Mighty Morphin all the way. I'll ever so often, if I can, I'll catch some of the newer stuff. But you go back and watch Super Sentai.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like that's intense.
especially Zoo Ranger, the one that Mighty Morphin is based off of. Mm-hmm. Like there's death, there's stakes, there's weight to things that happen and stuff like that. Yeah. Some of it's ridiculous. Some of it's slapsticky. That's why I think Kamen Rider is a bit of an acquired taste because I think that one leans a little bit heavier into a little bit more of that slapstick comedy sort of Japanese comedy trope of those kinds of shows. But like when those kinds of shows are good, they are absolutely stellar, you know?
Totally.
So we like to watch things, especially old anime from the 90s with the dub and the sub going because the subtitles inevitably are based on the Japanese, but the dub is in English. So then you can tell the differences and see the divergence of like, oh, they've inserted this word or that's not what they said or why'd they do that? It's not so big now in most modern day anime, but the older ones, it's pretty vast.
Night and day.
Yeah. But yeah, so around that same time when Dragon Ball Z was big, I was watching stuff like Big O, a little bit of Cowboy Bebop, not as much as some TJ would be having a field day in this conversation right now because he's our resident anime guy. And even if my brother-in-law is listening to this, he's having a field day with this conversation. I think this is the most sustained anime talk that we've been able to have because I said this about Celeste and now saying this about you. The fact that we can talk about anime on the show is scratching an itch for a contingent of our audience that doesn't get scratched on a regular basis. You know what I mean?
I'm happy to be a back scratcher.
Yes. I would suggest an anime for you if you are open to it. seeing as you're a big horror fan, you should check out Parasite.
Yeah.
Parasite. Okay.
Parasite. You would like Parasite.
Too much for me, but I bet you would love it.
Probably Parasite, Jujutsu Kaisen, which is a modern anime.
That one's a modern anime.
Yeah.
Parasite's not that old.
Well, I don't really know how old the anime is because I was reading the manga back in 1996, and I was way too young to be reading it.
I've stopped questioning judgments that happened on things you were allowed to read and watch.
So to give you an idea, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street when I was 5.
All right.
So I'm right in that same book. I was actually part of what made me really enjoy Bottom Shelf. Is one of you guys was talking about that, of like, because you constantly hear it, right? When you say stuff like that, it's one end of it. We already talked about the whole, some of how being a part of geek culture in Christian culture kind of makes you a pariah in certain circles, but also like saying stuff like, I was listening to guys like Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash and Tom Petty when I was knee high to a grasshopper. One of my first guitar solos that ever got stuck in my head was Boston's More Than a Feeling. Right. And like watching stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, mind you, this is not me sitting here espousing the virtues of letting your kid watch those movies.
5-year-old. Nightmare on Elm Street, not sponsored by Geek Devotions or Systematic Geekology.
Disclaimer.
Right. But I do think that there is room for a conversation to have about that moving goalpost of when a kid is mature enough to take in certain types of media and different things like that. I do think that's a sliding scale.
Totally.
5 is very, very high on the one side of the scale, 100%. But you move on.
Kid, let's watch Saw together.
I mean,
right.
It falls under we talk about this on our show often about what you can handle.
Yeah.
Celeste cannot handle Nightmare on Elm Street. I find the story fascinating because I've had someone explain it to me. But if I was to watch that, it would open up things in my mind that I can't handle mentally or spiritually. Now, you can handle it. Great. That's awesome. But knowing your boundaries and in turn knowing your children's boundaries and what's going to cause them to wake up screaming from nightmares and what's going to cause them to have giggles, that's the thing of parenting.
Yeah. We had a conversation with one of our podcasters, John Haryu, because I say one of our podcasters, we have a team of individuals. John's on the bottom shelf. But on the ComTalk feed, we did a month called Cthulhu, where all of our devotions were based off of Cthulhu based stories.
Lovecraftian fiction.
Yeah, Lovecraftian fiction. And so, Lovecraft comes with a lot of baggage. He was a racist crackhead.
Yes.
And so when we did not shy away, we said he was a racist crackhead, plain and simple. But he created a genre that people have connected with. And so John, he loves Lovecraftian fiction, loves it. In fact, tomorrow night for Playing Games with Strangers, he's hosting a Call of Cthulhu game instead of their normal D&D. And so, but we interviewed him for ComTalk and we're talking about Lovecraftian fiction. And I asked, like, man, how do you balance this out? Because he's into horror movies across the board. He loves all this stuff. It's like, how do you balance this out with your faith? And he's like, I don't eat cookies all the time, but I enjoy cookies. I understand that I need to have a balance in my life of what I do take in and what I don't take in. And if all you take in is straight trash, well, yeah, you're going to be messed up spiritually, emotionally, and mentally in a lot of ways. And you have to know your boundaries. The Bible says, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. That there's a lot to talk about with that verse. Essentially, though, you need to know where you're at with God. And if something's hindering you, you need to chop it off and, grow in your faith.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is Brandon and I, who are the resident horror guys out of the group, need to get this guy on the show. We did an episode on Cthulhu, and we in 2020, my wife and I got super into board games. We were into board games previously, but we like took the opportunity to start collecting board games, and we went very heavily into the Cthulhu verse games, Mansions of Madness, Arkham Horror, all of those ones that all kind of interweave and things like that. And it's one of those things that forces you to ask questions and forces you to find where the line is between art and artist. You know, I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. That the pro wrestler that killed himself and his family, he doesn't exist anymore. Like to me, he does not. He does like I won't glorify him by watching any of his stuff. I can't talk about how good of a wrestler he was because like he killed himself and his family, and that line looks different for every person. And I love the way that they put that because back in October, my wife and I did 31 in 31. We did we did one of those for some of the Patreon content for her show. And let me tell you, I came out of that and into November on a back foot. Like that messed me up. Like that was too much. Too much is too much. We went hard and I shut down for like a month. You know what I mean? Like had to walk away. We'd literally just launched SG and all of that, and I had to step away and couldn't because it was too much of a very specific kind of thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think that's a wonderful way to articulate it because it's honestly, I could see the world where these kinds of things affect you if you're just watching superhero flicks or just watch it, whatever it is. If you're continuing in on something that's damaging, don't keep doing that. But there's a fine line and there's nuance to having the conversation between if you can't handle this, then don't do this, to sweeping statements that say, because the Holy Spirit convicts, nobody's allowed to do this. You know what I mean? And laying that yoke of burden on other people.
Yeah. Yep. We're often asked in our comment sections, like, you know, how could you watch this show? How could you be okay with this? How could you be okay with that? Across the board. It's funny. When we did Cthulhu, one of my writers had a real big issue with it because of the history of Lovecraft. And he was one of my writers. He's the big reason why we did a whole month devoted to Star Trek. It was called Trekmas that we did.
That's awesome.
And it was our kind of our Christmas theme. And I said, look, man, the whole series that you help us put together, Trekmas, I got hate mail on that because Star Trek isn't exactly the most Christian thing and promotes a lot of agnostic teachings. I was like, across the board, people are going to be convicted by something.
Yeah.
Period. And this is what I tell my team whenever we do a theme. If you have a personal conviction about this, don't do it. The Bible says that, you know, about talking about the meat sacrifice on the altars and not causing your brother to sin. And I'm not going to tell somebody, hey, you have to go watch Cthulhu if you have a problem with horror movies. You know, I'm not going to tell somebody that, hey, you need to be into watching anime if you have a problem with certain things. And again, that's a terrible example because anime is a genre and people have taken it to do dumb things.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you have a conviction about something, the sinful thing is for you to indulge in that conviction.
Right.
The righteous thing is to go, nope, not going to do it. And back out. Sweet. But you and I may not have the same convictions about stuff. We span the board across the nation. There's a lot of things. I have some dear, great Christian brothers and sisters who are involved with stuff. I'm like, I can't go there, buddy. I just can't. It's just, I'm not sure how you're doing it, but you seem to be doing okay. I'm here with you, but I just can't. And I'm going to respect that because that's what you're walking in. And they do the same thing with me. They're like, I don't know how you do certain things. I'm like, I just do because that's where I don't have a weakness in this area. This is what the Lord's blessed me with. And this is how I'm going to walk out. And I'm going to balance it out though, but make sure this isn't all I focus on. I think that's the problem is where we see people having problems where all they do is focus and dwell on one thing. Yeah. Years ago, when I was a youth pastor, I had a student who all he did, now he had a lot of issues, but all he did was focus on horror and zombies and stuff like that, and it was affecting him. And this was his life 24/7. That's all he ate and breathed. And he kind of came out like what you had when you did that 31-31 with your wife. Is just, if that's all you're consuming, it's going to mess you up. I don't care who you are. I don't care how strong of a Christian you are. It's going to mess you up, and you're going to have to come out and detox and ask yourself, do I need to go back into that for a while at all? Right. And it's just a matter of knowing where you're at with your walk with God.
Right. And even if it's something that you don't normally have problems with, we don't eat the exact same thing every day. We don't constantly feed ourselves the same thing because your body gets used to it. Your body needs diversity. Our minds need diversity. Our minds need to not be focused on one style of thing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just how God created us.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to go ahead and this is a conversation that I feel like we could go another hour easily, but we got to bring it in for the wrap up. So we like to end off every episode with geeky recommendations. So what do you guys recommend for the lovely listeners?
The utterly uninteresting and unadventurous tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant. It is absolutely hysterical. The basis of the book series is Fred is a very boring person. He's an accountant. And one day on his way to the store, he gets turned into a vampire. So what does he do? He quits his job. He starts his own accounting firm, and he stays at home and buys blood from a hospital. He is very boring, but it has this great dry sense of humor. It described his first, he was trying to hunt and do the vampire thing. And I had to stop the audiobook and laugh because I went, that's what would happen if I was a vampire. He was sneaking across the roof, stalking somebody, and he tripped and fell into a garbage can. And he's like, nope. Just gonna get it from a hospital. I'm done.
That's awesome.
So cool. It's there are some language issues, but it's mostly pretty clean, and it's got this great dry sense of humor to it.
Word.
Cool.
I got mostly podcasts I can recommend for folks right now. There's a great podcast called Systematic Ecology that I don't think anybody's ever heard of. I just discovered it. There's one called the Cellcast, where if you just love animation, not necessarily anime, but animation, they do cover anime. The Cellcast is a podcast. It's two great guys,
animation,
Josh and Drew, and they just talk about different animated shows and movies
Jacob
all the
and
time.
Drew.
Did I say Josh?
You said Josh.
Man, Jacob.
You're thinking Jacob.
I also want to recommend Retro Rewind Podcast, which is a podcast where they review movies and video games that are 15 years old or older, and they rate them as classic, nostalgic, or tragic, which is classic is great. It's fantastic. Nostalgia is don't spoil your memories, but watch if you want to. And nostalgia is oh, dear God, let it die. Or not nostalgia, but that's tragic.
Tragic.
Playing Games with Strangers, which is an actual play podcast.
It's family friendly.
If you want a quick devotional podcast, there's this one called the Enthusiast Podcast, which takes geek culture, and he does 5-minute devotions. There's Geeks Under Grace, which is connected to a website called Geeks Under Grace, and they do kind of a review of things happening in geek culture. Monster Out of Film Vault, which I talked about earlier. Victims and Villains, which is the marriage of geek culture and mental health. The Infinity Bros, which are fantastic guys who there's 6 dudes, and they're their tagline is Infinity Bros, where all things are perfectly balanced as they should be, and they talk about geek culture. Nice. There's so many great podcasts that I listen to on a regular basis.
Supersonic Pod Comics.
Yeah, that's a great one, which is kind of like an audio drama comic book one.
Nice.
So all those podcasts that you guys should probably check out. And then if you're just looking for a good anime, I recommend Bleach and Spy Family. That's what we forgot to mention. Spy Family is one of the greatest animes coming out right now. It is the top anime in Japan, and it is fan-freaking-tastic. We must protect Anya at all costs.
At all costs.
This is how it works.
I am absolutely going to go back and listen to that list of podcasts because I'm always looking for new shows and things like that.
We can send it to you. The list. We just know.
For me, the other podcast that I would recommend is the Jock and Nerd podcast. A little off color sometimes, I'll be honest. Maybe be careful if your kids are around. But it's the whole premise is one guy's a jock and one guy's a nerd, and they talk about geek culture stuff and things like that. And so I have been geeking out on that.
Nice.
So with that, thank you guys for joining us, and thank all of you lovely listeners for joining in on this conversation. For more wonderfully geeky goodness, you can find us systematicgeekology.org, and to help us keep the lights on, patreon.com/systematicgeekology. That is it for now, but as always, we want you guys to remember that we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
This was an Anazao Ministries podcast. If you enjoyed this show and would like to learn more about our network, be sure to check out the Anazao Ministries podcast network.